because I can do that in my sleep. No, jokes apart. One of the things that we've spent a lot of time in, you've built a whole company on this for almost 12 years.
Yeah.
And I was a data guy, so I got into design, and the cusp of data and design is analytics. Let's talk about analytics today. Shall we?
Yeah, episode 7, I guess.
7 it is. 7 is a lucky number as well. It's been a few weeks. I figured my travel was taking away too many weekends. And this is also a new location.
Yeah.
You're holding your chair with your hands. It looks like you're
about to take off.
But yeah, I was traveling, and I apologize for some of the delays here. But there's so much to catch up on, right?
Yeah.
The summer included. Did you go someplace? Were you here?
I'm mostly here. We made a trip to Alaska. That was a lot of fun, but that was a short week.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah. And did you take a cruise?
Yeah, we took a cruise. I think the highlight of the trip was a zip line that drops the height of Empire State Building within, I think, 2 minutes or something like that, reaching 60 miles per hour. So that was a lot of fun.
And you did that?
Yeah. All three of us did that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Incredible. I mean, talk about adventure, huh? We still have a lot of that energy left. I remember doing that probably 20 years ago. I traveled quite a bit, although I missed my family. They were all here. Our son is into basketball. The twins are also in basketball, and they just play a lot. And my son is, hey, let's just stay here this time and let me practice a few things. And so I was traveling. I was in all continents. I was in India, I was in New York, I was in Argentina, I was in Austin. But got to connect with a lot of folks, and there's just a ton of energy around in the company that was amazing to just go and connect with. So today, I guess we were talking about what's the one area where both of us are passionate about. And one of the things I said, which I still believe in very proudly, we can talk about this topic in our sleep. Looks like.
Let's not try it, though.
And that topic is breathing. Because I can do that in my sleep. No, jokes apart. One of the things that we've spent a lot of time in, you've built a whole company on this for almost 12 years.
Yeah.
And I was a data guy, so I got into design, and the cusp of data and design is analytics. Let's talk about analytics today. One of the things that we're also diving deeper into at DevRev too. Yeah. But it'd be worthwhile just talking about the journey. So where do you think we are in like the state of the art with analytics right now?
We've come really far, and still things mostly seem like most of the data teams are just getting by. So there's a lot that can be improved. But I think LLMs have definitely been a very interesting thing in the mix, and they're changing the analytics landscape. We were pushing in that direction for last 12 years, but now the world seems to have come around to our way of looking at things. So that's been exciting.
One of the things very interestingly, you talked about the adjacency of LLMs while we were at the topic of data. Yeah. I was talking to somebody today. He's like a very senior guy out of Accenture and had seen a lot of SaaS in the last 20 years. And I think the thing that I mentioned, and he kept using the word data-centric AI, and then it came up many times. In fact, coincidentally, in the morning I was talking to somebody from BCG, and they used the word data-driven and data-centric digitization and AI. And I'm like, why does the word data come up so often next to AI? Yeah. And I think I was just happy with the way I put it to this person. You know, I'm like, wow, that feels like a good analogy. So don't laugh at it when I say this. But I was like, it's like blood. It's a supply of blood. And if you don't have that supply of blood that goes to the brain, there is no thinking. There's no intelligence, really. Was that a cheesy thing to say, that data is like blood, a supply of blood? And then obviously you can visualize data pipelines. But to me, it's that important. Like without the blood, there is no intelligence. What do you think of that?
I think I like the analogy. All analogies break at some point.
Yeah.
but it's a good analogy. It also connects data to the heart.
You're right. Yeah. In fact, one of the things I saw this influencer Pramod Gosavi talk about recently was Snowflake.
Mm-hmm.
And he was talking about the Snowflake stock and obviously the fact that they're not AI enough. And obviously there's this story of these two companies.
Yeah.
Databricks versus Snowflake. So where do you think this whole thing is headed? Depth of SQL and breadth of a platform for analytics. Compare and contrast the two companies because I know you've actually partnered with both of them. So what does it feel like? And maybe get into the job. What about the Snowflake jobs and what about the Databricks jobs?
Yeah, I think both of those are really amazing companies with very different roots. And it just so happens that now they are entangled in this competitive world and they're both approaching the same place from different directions, and they come with their strengths and weaknesses. And there are definitely a lot more detractors of Snowflake at this point in time, but I think that they're both very strong companies with strong leaders, and they'll figure their path out. I think most of Snowflake's core strength lies in their SQL engine and sort of the optimizations they did at the storage layer, optimizations they did at the query layer, building like flawless execution engine that people can rely on scale with. Their roots was not non-SQL arbitrary computing, but they're moving there. And like Sridhar is an amazing leader with a lot of AI background, is pushing the company over there. Databricks always had that kind of root. Spark, for the most part, was either being used for ETL or preparing data for machine learning. So
it's interesting you say that. So one of them was data at rest company.
Yeah.
The other one was fairly data at in-flight company. And data in flight to me is like this piece, which is breadth, as opposed to data at rest is the depth piece of it. But say more on that. You were actually making a case for ETL versus databases. So where did they eventually come to really overlap?
So I think Snowflake's big strength has been a really rock-solid query planner execution, right? And so if you're dealing with large amount of data, you're doing a lot of analytical queries, they do really well. But it was a big surprise to me that a big chunk of workload, whether it's Snowflake or Databricks or GBQ, is actually just transforming the data, preparing it so that the business user could query it. And in that case, the latency doesn't matter as much. And the cost does matter. And that's one of the reasons why.
And when you say cost, you talk the human cost, the process complexity of data massaging, wrangling, ETL. Is that the piece that really takes most of the time?
I actually meant the cloud bill.
I see.
Over there. And that's one of the reasons when I've been talking to people, what they've been saying is that at least for the ETL part, they're moving their workload wherever they find a cheaper cost. And for the longest time, Snowflake was able to charge this.
This is it's so amazing what you just said. Because I don't know if you remember Teradata.
Yeah.
Do you remember Teradata?
Yeah.
And they said, look, do ELT, not ETL.
Yeah.
And obviously it was a self-fulfilling thing. Why would you load first and then transform? And the reason was very simple. They'd actually make more money. You bring in everything in and then you can transform inside. Obviously the speed at which you could load was fast because you don't have to apply logic along the way to do transformations. And then you could transform with SQL. And the language of transformation became SQL. And then here comes Hadoop, which says, no, that is cheating, guys. In fact, I remember eBay was a very large Teradata customer. And I was at Oracle back in 2003 and 2007. And we were only on the OLTP side. So all of e-commerce used to run on Oracle. And then all the analytics used to be in Teradata. And then here comes Hadoop out of nowhere. And I was at Astra by this time. And we were looking at what was going on. I'm like, oh, so what's happening is that all the transformation piece, the operational data store piece is moving out of Teradata into Hadoop because the cost was just humongous. And it looks like something similar is going on with this iceberg idea. So say more on these format wars and what people want to do outside of Snowflake and what they want to do inside of Snowflake.
Yeah, so I think one of the reasons why Snowflake dominated in the last decade was their whole microsharding approach. And like the way you got advantage of that was by putting your data in Snowflake and turning it into this custom format. And over the decade...
And when you say microsharding, you mean the 2 million S3 objects on which...
Yeah, so for the most part, from what I understand, you just partition your rows by the insertion time, and you get it to really small 64 MB file size, so that based on whatever filters you're using, you could actually pick a very small fraction of that data to read from S3 or disk or wherever you're reading from. But the industry has caught up now. So like other players have similar architecture, and now Iceberg is there, which is an open format that essentially removes vendor lock-in. And so because the customers are pushing for it, the entire industry is going over there. So I think some of that advantage has wiped out.
Talking about Iceberg.
Yeah.
And query optimization. Like what happens when you lose the control and the finesse and the details of the storage architecture, the way the data is organized in partitions and subpartitions, and how do you deal with a storage layer that is just independent of the query layer?
I think so. People are now optimizing for this open format Iceberg, and I think one of the things that has happened is that if you by default partition by insertion time, a lot of the advantages of IO pruning just preserves, and there are exceedingly rare cases where you have to go and repartition the data in some other way. I guess if you have multi-tenant architecture, then maybe.
I remember Netezza doing this way back, and it was obviously pre-cloud.
Yeah.
And this was when ASICs were hot.
Yeah.
Remember ASICs? When Intel acquired Altera, and obviously these guys did too. AMD acquired a couple of companies in ASIC space as well. But they were trying to do this on the disk controller itself, saying, hey, we can actually do a lot of filtering and projection. They even talked about zone maps, things that have actually stayed pretty popular up until now. So you don't feel like Snowflake will suffer if they have to use an Iceberg third-party open source format for query optimization?
Like I think there would be some differences, but not huge differences. I think the biggest problem is that now there's no advantage. The advantage is wiped out.
Interesting. Very interesting. And what about the acquisition of Iceberg, the company, by Databricks? Do you think that was cheeky?
I think, I really don't know. I think there's definitely some talent acquisition there, and some of it is...
I don't know if it's actually the way Oracle acquired MySQL, that, hey, we got to do this because you can kill it. Because even Databricks, coming back to the breadth, it looks like they had a SQL engine.
Yeah.
It was a meh kind of thing, and not really the best of SQL engines, unlike Snowflake. Then they acquired another SQL engine. So you don't feel this is, hey, let's just take this open source thing and rest the initiative?
At least so far, it seems like the industry is really gunning for Iceberg to win. So I think right now trying to go against the grain may not work.
This happened with HDFS too, right?
Yeah,
I mean, this was a format that was open source.
Yeah.
Yahoo guys had done this. For many people who probably don't remember, there was a company called Yahoo, and they were fairly cool at what they did, right? I mean, it just goes back to the days of Google versus Yahoo.
Yeah.
And remember how by 2008, obviously, they were late to commodity. They were late to open source. I mean, Google had started all this stuff back in 2000 with Linux and all this stuff, and these guys were still in the luxury of Oracle and Oracle Exadata and Solaris and also NetApp and things like that. But by 2008, it looks like they were making a lot of headways with open source, but maybe too little, too late, right?
Yeah.
All of Hadoop, we owe it to Yahoo.
Yeah, very much.
All of Cloudera, we owe it to Yahoo and stuff. So you don't think this is like one of those things that will be like HDFS and eventually becomes commodity?
Yeah, so I think that there's a fight for the share of the SQL workload, and then there's a fight for the share of the AI workload. And I think that's where most of the attention is right now, that can these two companies, one of them own, or either of them own a big chunk of it? And it's not clear to me. The biggest thing is that I think the reason both these companies got to own a lot of compute was because structured data was locked either in Snowflake's format or was locked in Databricks' format. And there was good reasons for customers to go to those formats because they got better price, performance, latency, and all that. There's no such thing for unstructured data. People may put some of their unstructured data in these two systems, mostly because of the tight security perimeter they have built around these things. But other than that, there is no big reason. A lot of this data is sitting in apps, it's sitting in like file storage, NetApp, and things like that. So there's no affinity for compute to go over there. So I think whoever provides the best possible service of doing various AI workloads, whatever they may be in future, will win that compute. And it's not clear to me it's going to go to either of them necessarily.
This takes me back to my 2003, 7 days at Oracle. The one thing that we did really was, and in fact, my manager, Amit Ganesh, who used to be a manager back at Oracle, I bumped into him in Bangalore. And I said, do you know that what we built, what you built, what your team built, actually solved some really hard nuclear fusion problems at some very large labs? And oh man, I'm going to talk about that. So next couple of episodes will be with Amit Ganesh. We'll talk about the history of databases.
Very cool. Looking forward.
Yeah, but we actually built an unstructured, we used to call it LOBs, file storage inside the database. But it is just a place that's incongruous. It was built for SQL, it was built for structured data, and we built a whole new engine for unstructured data inside a structured database. But the pricing, the scaling, the metadata thinking, there's so much on the metadata side itself. Looks like what you're saying is that there will be a structured and an unstructured world. And my thing is that they'll be everywhere. The unstructured piece is going to be everywhere. And the fact that you can crawl and index it and vectorize it and then do semantic search on it probably will win, right?
Yeah.
So it's a big one out there. Now, what about Databricks and AI? What's the big AI thing? Because obviously, I look at three players in this space right now. Two of them are centralized. One is obviously OpenAI, which is centralized AI, proprietary AI. The other one is centralized, which is Anthropic, and maybe a little bit quasi-decentralized because you can run them in Amazon's AWS's Bedrock and things like that. So it can follow your region you're in, and probably more enterprisey than OpenAI. Maybe OpenAI goes after Google-like workloads or search-like workloads and so on. And the third one is Llama and everything that Facebook is doing. What's the place for Databricks and Snowflake in this whole equation?
So they obviously both have put out things like fine-tuning, things like running LLM over multiple records, things like RAG solutions. Nobody really has a technological moat right now. So
in the model space.
Yeah. So it's like how well you execute, how close are you to the user, what kind of experience you're providing, what is your distributional advantage. That's what probably matters. But I also think that we haven't figured out the real AI workloads yet. Sure, like right now people don't know what to do with this, so everybody is doing essentially RAG. People talk about agents, but it's a little bit of workflow sitting on top of RAG, essentially. Right?
As we've talked about, we'll probably dedicate a whole couple of episodes to agents. Speaking of AI, part of it actually must be true, but part of it is probably just marketing. Klarna just said that they got rid of their sales force. And they think they can get rid of the sales force because AI. Talk about the word AI. It's like world peace. Nuclear fusion is free energy. Sort for everything. But there's some truth to it as to how older SaaS companies will probably get challenged by new data formats, new workflows, new ways of doing analytics, new ways of doing search and such. But we'll keep that agent episode for another time. So what do you think is about Databricks and Snowflake? I still feel like you probably have to dig deeper into what is AI for Databricks. Is it Jupyter Notebooks? Is it ML Ops? Are they trying to really say, look, the models are the models, they're commodity, but we'll actually provide a CI/CD like JFrog, like Harness for machine learning and AI. Is that where they're headed, the control plane, as opposed to being the data plane? Because the data planes are already counted between the GPT 4.0 and the ilk, and then there's Anthropic and Sonnet and everything else. And finally there is Llama and such. So is the data plane done and now it's all about control plane for these two guys?
don't know. So their primary businesses are still like ETL and analytics and things like that, right? Most of the money flows from there. Most Databricks money flows through people doing ETL and notebooks, right? But they're investing a lot in AI workloads. And my main contention is that whatever they're investing, it's today's workloads for AI. 2 years from now, I think it's going to be very different.
Which is unstructured and conversational.
Yeah. And even within unstructured and conversational, I don't know how much of it is still going to be just like searching through PDFs and throwing them in the context of LLM or like what new ways. Like I think the biggest challenge of the day today for the industry is that like we're burning $300-400 billion on all the AI infrastructure and investment, and where is the return going to come? Is it all going to be just like chatbots and things like that?
I mean, look, you're going to start me talking about the bubble burst and everything else, which the bubble will burst. Yeah. Maybe we should have an episode for that as well.
Yeah. But my contention is bubble burst or not, I think one way or the other, this is a fundamental technology. We will figure out a way to pay back that money and make some more.
Yeah, it'll just take longer.
It will just take longer. And we will, in process, will invent new kinds of workloads for which none of the establishment has the advantage over somebody else. It's like somebody is going to come up with a better way and they're going to take the cake.
And what about the jobs, the Snowflake jobs, which is still more IT-centric versus Databricks, which is a little bit more developer-centric or data scientist-centric. Yeah. You think that these two ecosystems will blur the lines? Is it basically a little bit of, I would say, dream for Snowflake to get into AI and for Databricks to get into SQL, or do you think that both the ecosystems will look very similar in the next 3 to 5 years, and the jobs that are behind these two?
So I think Databricks is definitely in the SQL world, and to the extent that Databricks is in the AI world, most of it is doing the data prep for ML workloads, the traditional ML workloads, right? And then there's the new AI workload around LLM, where maybe one is ahead compared to the other, but I think they're both at the beginning of this journey, and the whole world is at the beginning of this journey. So it depends on who can innovate fast and who can move fast. And I won't consider this race call to any extent.
Let's switch to a layer above then.
Yeah.
Because this happened within the database wars of the 90s.
Yeah.
Sybase, Oracle, IBM just killing each other for the data engine, the database engines, the SQL optimizations, the row locking, all sorts of things that we had to do in the 90s for these things. And then finally Oracle said, look, we got to be in the app space. And they were struggling with apps since 1987. But it was really saying, look, we need to actually go to the next layer of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's not just food, shelter, clothing. To me, visualization looks like that thing to really complete the picture in analytics. So let's talk about visualization on top of both of these, Databricks and Snowflake, the fact that they don't have it, the fact that Google has it, and the fact that Microsoft thinks they have it. This is the whole ecosystem out here, which you should probably talk about in depth.
Yeah, I think Microsoft definitely has it.
But they probably don't have the engine underneath as good as these two. They definitely have the upper half.
Yeah. So Power BI has taken a lot of revenue away from Tableau. And even though I feel it's a significantly inferior product, but Microsoft knows enterprise space and it knows how to...
They know how to bundle. Right? Yeah. There was this CIO I was talking to, and he said something like, this is like 7-8 years ago in Chicago. And the Microsoft rep was sitting right in front of me. And I'm like, why is your product quality so bad? So the guy pauses and he's looking all sorts of answers. And finally the real defense was, but what do you expect? You don't even pay that much for it. The guy, you get out of my room. Right? I'm like, man, that's a classic answer. Okay, checkmate. We move on. Drop the mic. But I remember that. So what you just said about Power BI. But that's the power of distribution. Looks like they have distribution. Yeah. And they probably do it well enough for the base of the pyramid. This is Excel plus.
So here's the thing that annoys me the most, is that because of their distribution, for example, we've been doing this ability to Google like search text to visualization for a long time. And for most people, the first view of that would be through Power BI. Mm-hmm. And they'll look at it and they'll say, this sucks, this doesn't work. Mm-hmm. And they'll conclude that this whole technology doesn't work. Mm-hmm. And then it's upon us to go and convince them and pull them out of that hole to say, no, it doesn't work because Microsoft did a poor job, not because the technology doesn't work.
But does it work for the line of business versus IT? Are there like different personas for which there's lightweight Excel plus folks versus the data warehouse plus folks? So you have to think about both sides of this equation, IT versus line of business. Do you think there is a dichotomy there?
Oh, absolutely. So Microsoft did a fantastic job of copying Tableau. They have not done any innovation, but they've done a fantastic job of copying Tableau.
You're not getting your Azure credits anymore. It's like this guy is not going to get any Azure credits.
And they've done a good job of integrating with their own ecosystem, right? So it works for IT. If somebody has a dashboard factory and they just want to churn out dashboard after dashboard, Microsoft Power BI works very well.
You obviously introduced Tableau. I was trying to keep it for ThoughtSpot versus Tableau. But let's talk about Looker and Google. Because obviously they made this acquisition almost 3 years ago, 4 years ago. And where has that eventually ended? Is it like the antibodies have killed it? Is it actually a force to reckon with? And does it give them a significant advantage compared to Snowflake and Databricks not having visualization?
So Looker is a really interesting story, and one we, ThoughtSpot, have learned a lot from and could have learned sooner. So compared to what we were building, Looker was a really thin product. Essentially, the founders of Looker were seeing that they're maintaining 20 different SQL in a file, and then going and modifying that SQL depending on their use case every time. And so they needed essentially a templating language to generate different kind of SQL, and that was the origin of Looker. Now, the few things that was really perfect timing for them. One was that Redshift was doing really well. Snowflake was just really coming up. Google BigQuery was just really coming up. And no other BI product was designed to sit on top of them and work.
All three of them.
Yeah. And just work, because most of the BI traditionally pulled data out of the warehouse and then worked on it, either like in its own internal memory or on Cube. And these guys had this approach that we're just like generating SQL and running it on top of warehouse. Eventually the industry came there, but they were early. So they were the only game in town if you wanted to visualize on top of Snowflake or Redshift.
But it looked like it was a lightweight enough product.
Yeah, and it was SaaS. The other thing that it coincided with was traditionally BI was not done by developers. BI was done with folks inside IT who were technical but typically not writing code. They understood SQL generation, they understood data models, but they were mostly doing things by drag and drop. But this was the time when like more modern companies were putting engineers in charge of data. And so they were missing a lot of code encapsulation and inheritance and templatization and version control and parameterization. And all these things came with Looker because it was essentially a desire to build a SQL generation programming language.
Interesting, very interesting. But you said a few, maybe take the three most important shunts that you mentioned. Was it versioning and two other things? Like, say a little bit more about that phenomenon. Why was it developer friendly? Did it actually have check-in, check-out capabilities?
Yeah.
And then what are the two other things that made it truly developer friendly?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing that Looker did was when you configure a dashboard, there's a lot of complexity in that, like how you join things, how you define your metrics, even how you visualize things. And every product, including us until 5-6 years.
Us being ThoughtSpot.
Maybe like before 2018, when you did something, it got stored in some opaque format inside the application that you had no access to other than through the UI. And so you had no way of doing things like breaking it into reusable components, putting some testing on top of it, essentially moving things from prod dev to prod and things like that. And Looker came in with LookML, which was essentially programming language representation, declarative representation of all these configurations that was being done inside UI. And that was really the big deal that made Looker shine, in addition to being initially the only game in town to sit on top of
It's
these.
interesting you said this about sandboxing, and because at DevRev we have to do the same thing for SaaS data and features and custom objects, custom attributes, custom snap-ins, because all these are things that our customers want to go build.
Yeah.
But it can be done on prod directly, unless you're Bill O'Reilly, which you can just do it live. But you can do it live, so you got to do sandboxing. So it looks like this whole process that they figured out.
Yeah.
What has happened in the last 3 years, though? Have they kept up with respect to the visualization side of things, or do you think it's basically slowly dying a slow death?
No, so I think Looker is...
Because you watch out. If you say anything bad, even your GCP credits are down. So you watch out.
No, so I think what happened with Looker was once they got acquired by Google, it just turned into a different thing. Google had to pull back support on Looker. Otherwise, Looker support was something people raved. The other thing that happens inside Google is that there's a particular way in which you build Google technologies, and Google engineers are very proud of it.
And you've been there 10 years, like almost?
I was there 5 years.
5 years, got it.
So there's a rich set of libraries, there's a rich foundation, there's a rich set of cloud primitives, and Looker comes in with their implementation in whatever language they did. Most Google engineers wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole.
Oh, gosh. Why? Because it's not invented here.
Yeah, and it's not in the architecture. It's not in the language.
Shared libraries,
It's shared libraries and stuff like that. And most Looker people had very little motivation to stick around. So it became very hard to continue to develop on that platform. And Google had this other thing called Data Studio.
Oh, gosh. Don't tell me this, because apparently what they've done is they've renamed it to Looker Data Studio.
Yeah.
And Looker is a separate platform.
Yeah.
And I just got to know about it yesterday, that in Google Workspace, Google Enterprise, you get Looker Data Studio for free. I'm like, man, they're becoming like Microsoft. And I'm not sure how good. It looks like it actually works.
Yeah.
But maybe this is a good time to talk about, do you believe that Snowflake and Databricks suffer because they don't have a Looker stack?
So what was happening, at least a few years ago, was that Snowflake and Databricks felt like they needed to be the Switzerland as far as BI tool is concerned, because BI is one of the biggest drivers beyond ETL. And even ETL happens because there's BI sitting on top, is one of the biggest drivers. And so they wanted close relationship with everybody, like Tableau, Power BI, ThoughtSpot, Looker. Although once Looker got acquired, that dynamic changed. And even if they could, they did not want to do BI. But now what's happening is that Looker is obviously aligned with Google. Power BI is obviously aligned with Microsoft, and Microsoft with its Fabric is really going with all integrated solution and is not giving time of the day as much to the Switzerland type party.
Interesting.
So now actually in Snowflake's interest and in Databricks' interest
to buy ThoughtSpot. You nailed it. It's a leading question, by the way. Look, Tableau did get acquired by Salesforce, and maybe you should say a few words about Tableau in the last 5 years versus Tableau in the previous 10 years as well. What's the state of the art happening in Salesforce? Because my thing is that they feel they have a data cloud. It's not even closed. Salesforce is not even closed. You still have to do your own Snowflake. You have to do your Fivetran or dbt behind it. You have to put data pipeline teams. You have to put a warehousing team. And probably all of it is happening in IT. And then all of a sudden you have Tableau on top of it.
Yeah.
But what was the special sauce that made them special?
Tableau back in the day was a really innovative company, right? This research on VizQL came out of Stanford, and they created this thing where you could drop in data and you get pretty visualizations right out of the box. And they did a lot of innovation around breaking what was a monolithic visualization into its attributes of like shape, color, size.
So highly flexible.
Yeah.
It looks like it was a CSS of its time.
Yeah.
Because it looks, from what I heard from you, it was a Windows application.
Yeah. To begin with, it was a Windows application.
So there was no HTML5. There was no CSS. So they had to come up with that language to customize the look and feel of it.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
But they did eventually had to move to a browser.
Yeah.
And then what happened to all that stuff? Was it all just CSS, or did they still put a secret sauce on top of it?
No, so I think it was the design of the product that lent itself to really good visualizations. And they had a lot of richness around there. The second thing, in early days, when we started in 2012, what Tableau was known for was in-memory analytics. So the databases were really slow, and if you had 10 million rows, you could just drop it into Tableau. It will load that in the memory of the PC or wherever it was running.
Oh, it was a memory of the PC.
Yeah.
It was not like a workspace database server running on a Windows NT machine or something. It was actually running on the laptop.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
We'll get to it as we talk about DevRev as well, but interesting, very interesting.
And so it was fast. So both Click and Tableau used to advertise in-memory analytics. And we obviously took it much farther by building Falcon, which had like 200 machine clusters with in-memory analytics. But that was the other thing that made Tableau special compared to the previous generation before Tableau and stuff. I think what has happened is that over time, everybody catches up on your innovation that you did 15, 20 years ago. And the next wave of innovation was all around making UX easier and making it easy for business users to ask questions and doing AI-driven insight. And on those front, Tableau has been mostly a follower. And once it got acquired by Snowflake, Salesforce, their interests were very different than Tableau. So,
well, it looks like you have a DNA of either visualization or data, front and back end. And we've seen that at Apple. Apple's DNA is not back-end cloud or AI and things like that. We'll see. I think maybe they'll do a really good job with the edge on the laptops and the mobile phones and things like that. I'm actually looking forward to some of that because I do believe that a lot of the analytics can and should happen. I wouldn't call it in-memory anymore. I'll just call it edge because I want to use the GPU, not just the RAM itself. But obviously it was an innovative company and then ThoughtSpot happened. So what do you think was the premise of ThoughtSpot early on? And looks like you guys had this thing called Falcon database. What's the history of having this database? Looks like it was trying to be distributed and you didn't want to be on the edge.
So there were two insights that led to the product definition of ThoughtSpot. One was that despite the improved ease of use from like tools like Tableau and Click, it was still very hard for business users to be able to get answers to their questions. We were in one of the user conferences of these two companies, and they had a reference customer on stage saying that now life is so amazing that every time you need a new report, all you have to do is fill this 3-page HTML form, and within a week, you will have your report. And so we looked at it and we chuckled to it and said, like, we can improve the state of the art from here. So our mission became, can we shrink that 1 week and 3-page HTML to essentially 2 minutes of delightful user interface?
So time to value.
Yeah.
Time to value.
And the second thing was that one of the reasons why analytics was so complex was because the in-memory architecture of these things couldn't scale to the enterprise data volume. And so they relied on extracts and pre-aggregations and things like that, and needed a technical person to do that. And so anytime you asked a question that went beyond what was already extracted and aggregated, then you had to get somebody to re-extract that data or recompute the cube or whatever thing you were doing. And so we said, what if we could build a really powerful distributed in-memory database where there's no need to aggregate? You could throw all the data in there, and whatever question you asked, it came back within seconds with the answer. And the third piece of insight was that RAM prices were dropping exponentially. It got into a point where if you're limited to, let's say, a few terabytes of data or even 100 terabyte of data, the cost of keeping that in RAM, the cost of that RAM was not that much compared to the software licensing fees.
And I'm holding my thought on DevRev on this because we do have this dichotomy that there's probably going to be server-side processing aggregates or maybe some sort of projection and filtering that you want to do there. But the rest you want to bring it to in memory,
Yeah.
and hopefully over time with text to SQL, GPU, and all that stuff on the laptops. But the philosophy is that, look, anything on the laptop on the in-memory side is like your new RAM. And anything on the server side is your disk.
Yeah.
So you'll have both. It's
Yeah.
not like you're getting rid of one or the other.
Yeah.
Even if you have the fastest servers and the most scale-out architectures, it is still a two-tier thinking.
Yeah.
In fact, you have a local disk on the laptop as well, and we can spill over temporary tables and all that stuff. So it's just, when you speak of that dichotomy, I smile. And then, so you do that. You're like, look, we can actually scale this in-memory thing in a distributed system. You build a database.
Yeah.
And that made for a real low latency experience.
Yeah.
People didn't have to go to a data warehouse for any of these things. Then you had a post-Falcon strategy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And talk about the why and the how.
Yeah, so this one really caught us flat-footed, right? So a bunch of things happened. One, if the database world had stayed where it was, we had a really powerful product, because there was no way that existing Teradata and Oracles of the world could give the performance that we were giving. And there's no way for any BI tool to give the kind of experience we could give on top of that fast database. But a few things happened. One, the world started moving to cloud. And if you rent the same server that we could buy for $50K on-prem, costed $70K a year to rent in Amazon. And so this whole premise that RAM is cheap enough so we can throw everything in memory and keep it on,
Interesting.
just went out of the door.
Interesting. Because bare metal was expensive.
Yeah, yeah.
And
yeah.
memory in the cloud was expensive.
Yeah, yeah.
Fascinating.
And the way that companies like Snowflake solved it was basically decoupling storage and compute so that you could use the servers for the fractional time that you needed it.
And also use some ephemeral storage for temporary tables. And
Yeah. And that was a different architecture than what we had planned. So a lot of hard work that went into that optimization became just too expensive to hold on to in cloud.
And it looks like you guys did move to the cloud eventually.
Yeah,
Tableau apparently moved from Windows to a web browser
Yeah.
and so on. Any parallels between Tableau and ThoughtSpot when it came to that real surface transformation transition?
The only thing I would say is that any such transformation is really hard no matter what you think, and takes a lot of courage and someone who's willing to take a stand to do that, because there's always a lot of inertial reasons not to do it. So when we were building ThoughtSpot, we were like,
I'll show you all the battle scars for being a public company and transforming a business model over 4 years.
we were like, we're coming from Google, we're writing these applications the way we used to write in Google. The cloud is not a problem. We'll just take the whole stack and move to cloud when the customers are ready. But running something inside Google Data Center versus running something in public cloud turned out to be very different things. And so when we started looking at this thing, we realized that it was going to be a hard slog to move things. So particularly the database piece. Everything else was really manageable. But the database piece was really hard. And the other thing was, we always thought that multi-tenancy would be not that hard to inject. But that turned out to be hard, and that was really important to have the cloud SaaS business model so that you could sell like a tiny fraction of the server and the service to somebody as opposed to...
It's interesting to talk multi-tenancy. And at Nutanix, we tried it. It was just not in the DNA to actually do anything multi-tenant, because you thought about the box and the server and the real estate like that. So when we started to do DevRev, I think it was, and we didn't just take the multi-tenant approach, because you could have taken a ServiceNow-like approach, which is, hey, just go sell to Fortune Global 2000. You can just throw them a LAMP stack, and so they throw like a bare metal kind of metaphor, and they put a whole LAMP stack. And in fact, they used to be in MySQL, MariaDB, now they're in Postgres too. But you realize that SaaS 2.0 is very different. You just don't need a Postgres, but you need a search engine, a graph database, a warehouse, and all this other stuff. So you've got to really figure out a way to not just multi-tenantize it, but micro-tenantize it. And one of the big reasons was because we wanted to keep that optionality for startups to also use our product.
Yeah.
Look, we cannot just build something so heavyweight that only the large enterprise can use us. Funnily enough, architecture just works on both ends of the spectrum, and it's just beautifully done. We look at every service in the cloud and say, look, we can't give such big chunks to any one tenant. So you have to really slice and dice it. All the way from the graph database to the syntactic search engine, to the semantic search engine, to the data warehouse, to eventually to the in-memory stuff that we do with analytics as well. We call the word micro-tenancy instead.
I remember you telling me that your goal was to have a tenant for 50 cents a month.
Yeah,
right?
For a very small tenant, I think there's a budget within the company. It is still a folklore in the company that we should not be spending more than 50 cents. I'm pretty sure the architects have not cared about it for the last year or year and a half. Yeah. But in the first year and a half, we were like, look, we've got to make sure that we don't spend more than 50 cents a month for a very small tenant who we haven't even bothered to call for sales or asking them for money or something. Because there's something to be said about startups. You help them in every which way you can. We feel like they're all starting up. They're spending so much time figuring out the why and the how of their company. If we can actually left shift a lot of the complexity and give them something for free, then why not? I think that's the way we've architected it. And that's why you might wonder, like, why are we so passionate about analytics at DevRev? And it's because at some level, SaaS 2.0 is different. 20 years ago, SaaS 1.0 was about, hey, we'll left shift a lot of the complexity. You guys spend so much time on IT and hardware and procuring hardware and doing backups and securing with firewalls and understanding upgrades and all sorts of patching and things of that nature. Why don't you let us do that? And then we'll give you API access, and that makes it for a very lightweight way of dealing with SaaS. I think it's a brilliant idea. Just the fact that you're able to left shift so much complexity and then leave the line of business to deal with APIs. And then you collaborate with your partners with APIs, because cloud became a place where both the partner, which was not your same company, employees were able to go customize and implement and do all sorts of things with it. So cloud became a place for collaboration where both parties could come with APIs. But in the last 20 years, I think we've come a long way. In many ways, what Salesforce looked at Oracle as, oh wow, these guys are heavy, they're not integrated, they're complex, they're expensive, they've acquired all these companies, they're not fully integrated, has become that thing. Salesforce has become the thing it didn't want to become in the last 15 years. In fact, I was reading some Wall Street Journal articles from 10, 11 years ago on Oracle Fusion and how Forrester basically said, when we poll Oracle customers, they are unwilling to move to Oracle Fusion. And the reason is because when they look under the hood, it was not built for the cloud. It was built for on-premises. So after 6-7 years of Oracle Fusion, you still fused all this stuff, but what came out was a gobbledygook of different things, and it was not ready for the cloud. And by the way, I don't get any Oracle credits for this anyway. So I'm fine saying what I'm saying right now. OCI is probably further away. Although you never say never in business. Don't burn bridges with Larry Ellison, by the way. I have a lot of respect for Larry, actually. In fact, there's a really good interview I made like 6-7 years ago on Business Insider about Larry and what I learned from him. But I think Salesforce has become like Oracle of 15 years ago. If anything, Oracle has improved a lot because they have cloud native things happening out of Seattle and such. You might say too little, too late, but but I think we realized that this new world of SaaS 2.0, we need to do more for the customer. They shouldn't have to go build a search engine or buy a search engine and retrofit it, buy an analytics engine and retrofit it, or buy a workflow engine and retrofit it. So analytics was a big part of our thinking. We said, look, if you're talking about a new stack, it needs to do the integration, which we call the knowledge graph. We talk about search, analytics, workflows. And within analytics, the two ends of the barbell, startups, freemium startups not paying us any money, and large companies who have complex things that we do for them should get the exact same feature set. So in that vein, we said we're going to really do a lot of the warehousing, the heavy lifting of ETL and transformations and all this stuff for them. We call it airdrop for pipelines, ETL. But we also do all the data crunching in the what we call midstream in terms of summaries and aggregates and all sorts of filter and projection. And it's all happening in a multi-tenant system. So you don't have to go buy an explicit single-tenant Snowflake or Databricks. And we think the line of business would probably appreciate it. because we're doing it for them as opposed to they having to do all of this. That's a fair definition of SaaS 2.0.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we couldn't let a browser go directly against a centralized server.
Yeah.
I think just the experience gets killed. You're talking about 50, 100-second response times, which is the one thing that you guys gave up when you gave up Falcon.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, this low latency, sub-second experience. You just move to this thing where it's now taking 50, 60 seconds. Any regret on that?
So I think what ended up happening was that there was definitely a trade-off between sort of the best cloud data warehouse versus Falcon. But what I also realized was that they had done a much better job of planning. We had done a much better job of building a blazing fast execution engine, but they had done a better job of planning. So there's some queries, there were a lot of queries where we were like sub-second for billions of rows of data, but there were a lot of queries where we were slow and they were actually faster. And so I don't know that we gave up that much in terms of latency between moving from Falcon to a fast SQL engine.
And you're not being politically correct right now, right?
No,
they're a partner. So Good. So yeah, look, I think analytics is core to both of our backgrounds. It runs in our blood. I feel if there's one way we can disrupt SaaS 1.0, it goes through analytics into AI. At some level, the path to AI is through analytics. The path to AI is through search. The path to AI is through workflows. So eventually, the word that we're all using is a more intelligent computer, which is AI. But the more intelligent computer has to be awesome at unstructured search, like you mentioned, and it has to be awesome at doing. And we should probably do a real episode like we've talked about how everything is a search problem or not. I think analytics to me is a search problem, and workflows to me is a search problem. Having a bank of knowledge articles and analytic widgets and workflow automations, they're all eventually, to me, a search problem. So maybe we should just spend a couple of hours talking about agents and how both of us are looking at that as well. But this is great talking to you today. I know it's turning dark. We have been in this beautiful Bay Area. Now the temperatures also look so good. You can never complain. It's such a beautiful place, right?
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for watching. Again, the next set of episodes is with I had two great managers in my early life. One is currently the CEO of Indeed.com, Chris Himes. I was at Trilogy when he was my manager, and I learned so much from him. And then my second manager was at Oracle, actually, was my third manager. But in the first 10 years, if you get two great managers, what else do you expect and what else do you hope for? And so we're going to spend some time with Amit Ganesh, this person who I look up to a lot. He's right now Google Cloud VP. He just owns all of database assets at Google Cloud. And he spent more than 20 years at Oracle. So he was fairly close to Larry Ellison as well and everything else. And finally, he's now close to Thomas Kurian. When he writes his resume, I'm sure he has a dichotomy to deal with too. So with that, thank you, Amit, for doing this today. I think it goes without saying that every time I talk to you, there's so much respect, so much learnings. And hopefully we can take a little bit of that for our DevRev employees as well.
Same here. I learned so much from you. So thank you for doing this together.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.